This is called Missing Ellen, and it's based on a true story. On a bone-chilling winter night, at the very beginning of the new year, Ellen Bogdanovich went missing. She went missing even though she had been with her roommate Sandy most of the evening in a familiar, well-lit neighborhood pub, nursing a single diluted white wine spritzer. She went missing even though the only stranger she and Sandy had spoken with was an unfortunately monotonous but meticulously polite fellow named George. Sorry, George. Who, in passing, mentioned he had always felt too shy, too inadequate to ask a girl out. And so he was alone on that dull post-New Year's night until he was lucky enough to find two young women to take him under their good-natured wing. George almost forgot his angst. So thrilled was he for the company, even though he heard both ladies declare themselves unavailable. Sandy was delightedly in love with a married man, and so she spent these holidays in a kind of accepting suspended animation until the romance could resume. Ellen, on the other hand, emotionally tender, recovering from the dissolution of a long-term engagement, and therefore a bit distant, more distracted than the devil-may-care Sandy. George was keenly aware of this about Ellen. Although he felt vaguely nettled by her aloofness, he also felt protective, concerned as he was about her innocence and vulnerability out in Manhattan late at night. And in fact, in the end, Ellen was the one who went missing. Before that, as the conversation eventually wore down, George offered the girls a lift home. Since he lived in a more remote suburban neighborhood in the Bronx, he had an old family sedan, safe and reliable, if not exactly a chick magnet. Taxis were notoriously few and far between at this hour, and standing on a street corner on thin hope of one happening by could be very risky. So why not accept George's offer, they agreed. The car was as clean and comfortable as George was gentlemanly, and Ellen's spirits lifted as they headed for the girls' 93rd Street tenement. She felt relief, knowing she would soon be home, wrapped in flannel linens in oblivion. Realizing she had not been very attentive or gracious to George, not very kind given his chivalry, she now chatted amiably with him as Sandy dozed in the back seat. They arrived at the brownstone without incident, and Sandy sat up abruptly, popped open the back door, and waved bright little farewell to George. Then she stepped out onto the curb to wait, slamming the door behind her as Ellen said a few final words. Waiting proved unnecessary, however, for that was the night that Ellen went missing. The car suddenly shifted back into gear and started moving again, and was on the FDR Drive heading north, kept precisely at the legal speed limit before Sandy could fully register what had happened. Ellen was still in the car, and the car and George were now gone, and Ellen was gone. The NYPD was immediately called in. So many questions were asked again and again and yet again, but in the end there was little to go on, not even a license plate number. Sandy, haunted and distraught, could not quite remember the color of the car, let alone the make and model. The pub staff, all still weary from heavy partying the day before, had barely noticed the ladies that night, let alone the nondescript George. They certainly could not agree on much about any of them. To further challenge the investigation, it began to snow in those pre-dawn hours. As the sun remained behind heavily overcast skies, the snow fell hard and long, a blizzard by noon. There were power outages, emergencies, other crises to handle. And so, in the end, Ellen remained a mystery, one bone-chillingly cold case among many evermore. And I offer this not to put a damper on the fun of the evening, but just to remind you that as you're having fun, that you should keep kind of aware of your surroundings. It may help you or somebody else. Thank you.